All right, everyone. Welcome to week 11. Today we're going to be talking about research ethics. Quick note, we had a very last minute change in presenter. Susan Matoski is with us here today. She's presented for CP1 in the past, so ignore my slides that say Eric is here. It's Susan instead, which is wonderful. Before I hand everything over to her, just a few reminders. Your revisions on your lit review were due this past Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Remember and recall that as faculty, we ask for at least, or typically not at least, but we typically ask for 1 week to get revisions back to you. And that tends to be 1 week from the day that the assignment is due rather than the day that you uploaded it. So if you uploaded it in advance, faculty is not always checking in advance of a due date to review that. So I know many of you are anxious to see how you did. Hang tight, recognize and remember that particularly Drs. Giles and Murphy have other feedback. Oh, Dexter, you should outreach to your individual course instructor if you still are waiting on feedback from your initial assignment. That's pretty, I'll look into that too, but make sure you outreach to your instructor. And now I lost my train of thought. So we typically ask for a week for feedback. Dr. Giles and Dr. Murphy, keep in mind that they have full-time jobs that they do outside of their work with DBH. So the two of them in particular often have specific days that they grade on. So just kind of hang tight and we'll get you your feedback as soon as we can. Assignment number 3, which is the CITI training, is due this Sunday, and Susan's going to talk today about ASU's IRB and research ethics in general. The CITI training is really kind of also going to get you up to speed on this. I will reiterate, and I've said this before, but just as a reminder, the CITI training is fairly lengthy, and so it's not something that you should start working on at 10 o'clock on Sunday night because you won't get it in by the deadline if that's the case. You need the CITI certificate of completion for this assignment. And keep in mind this assignment is actually asking for 2 things. It's asking for you to upload the certificate of completion, or sometimes the completion report is more visible to students and we'll take that too. But it's also asking you to upload a screenshot that you have submitted this to your MyDBH file. And all of you have MyDBH. That will be the central hub where you're submitting material to your advisor when you're later on in the program. So we just need your certificate and your completion report on file in MyDBH. So we need to see both of those things. As a reminder as well, final revisions on assignment number 1 are due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. And so if you still have not yet achieved that 12 out of 15 on assignment number 1, your final effort on that is due this Sunday, and outreach to your instructor if you have questions. Also, just kind of as an FYI, Dr. Dal Papalizio had a death in the family on Friday, and so she is traveling this week for her father-in-law's funeral and is very, very, very intermittently checking email. So if you're in Dr. Dal Papalizio's group, please hang tight as best you can. Obviously, she didn't expect to be away during this time, but she is doing her best to kind of balance her family's needs and your guys' needs as well. So if you have any pressing issues or questions about a future assignment, feel free to outreach to me during this week. I'm not going to be grading papers on Dr. Dal Papalizio's behalf just because she's been working with you guys on assignments thus far, and so I don't want to kind of misspeak in some of the feedback that you guys have been working on collaboratively with. But just have that kind of in the back of your mind if she's not as responsive as she usually is to you. She does have an out of office up to this effect right now, but I just wanted to kind of remind people that if you haven't emailed out to her and weren't aware already. On that note, I am going to hand it over to Susan. Oh, somehow you stopped being a presenter, Susan. I'll make you a presenter again. You should be able to turn your mic on again. I'm going to hand it over to Susan, and Susan, as a reminder, you can forward the slides in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. There's 2 arrows, and you can forward the slides in that way. Okay?
Great. Can everyone hear me now?
We can. I'm going to mute my mic and
Okay.
turn off my webcam so you're not all staring at me while I listen to Susan too.
Okay.
Susan,
And
take it away.
thank you, everyone. I want to give the caveat that these beautiful slides were prepared by Eric Williams in our office. He's on the I guess the caller presentation as well. So good afternoon, everyone. If you have questions, we do most of our presentations sort of in live classrooms. So if you have questions at any time, I can see this this chat3 screen. I guess that's what it shows up as mine. So just feel free to type them and we will be sure to get back to you. So I skipped the slide about Eric. My name is Susan Matoski. I've been with the Office of Research Integrity and Assurance for about 11 or 12 years now. Eric is on the call as well, and he is a certified IRB professional. He has been with our office for, I think it's about 2 years now. So we're going to start out by going through an overview of the process and some definitions. So our office is called the Office of Research Integrity and Assurance. It used to be called the Research Compliance Office. The functions are the same. We make sure that researchers comply with federal, state, and university policies governing various compliance areas such as research with animals, biological materials, and today's presentation is going to focus on research involving human subjects. So the IRB is short for the Institutional Review Board, and this is the group that reviews all research with human participants to make sure that their rights and welfare are protected. So as I mentioned before, our office is called ARIA, and again, that stands for Research Integrity and Assurance. At Arizona State University, we have 2 institutional review boards. One is the Bioscience Board, and the other is the Social Behavioral Board. In terms of which committee to submit to or which form to fill out, really think about the risk of your studies. If the risk is more physical in nature, you're going to fill out the bioscience form. If it's more of an emotional or informational risk, you're going to fill out the social behavioral form, and we'll get to that shortly. There are federal regulations that govern the composition of institutional review boards, meaning that they have to have men, women, scientists, and non-scientists, and at least one person who is affiliated with the community. So our committees are, we keep the registration up to date, and we comply with the federal regulations in terms of how our committees are structured. So this part of the presentation, I do want to say that human subjects research, the definitions on this slide are not ones that we made up at ASU. They're ones that the federal government has. So I like to start with human subject because I think that's sort of easier to digest. And you'll see that, I'm just going to read this. It says, a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research obtains data through intervention or interaction with the individual or identifiable private information. So you'll see a couple words in, a couple things in red here, intervention, interaction. One thing that is not in red is living. So I just gave a talk earlier today to a group downtown, and I mentioned that if they were looking at medical records from deceased individuals, that wouldn't be human subjects research because the individuals are deceased. So I think this part is actually clearer because, again, a human subject has to be something that's living. This next part, in my opinion, research gets a little bit trickier. Research is something that is systematic, that's designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. And that generalizable knowledge, that's tough because what that means is a presentation, a publication, going to a conference. But let's say that you were all in the same place and we were doing this for a class project. That's not generalizable. So that's something that if there are questions on later, let me know. I know with this group in particular, this is something that has come up time and time again in terms of, what is generalizable. So that's, I think, something we should revisit toward the end. So in terms of the history of human subjects research, we're going to go through that kind of briefly because I know that at the beginning, one of the assignments that you all got was to work on the city training, and I think that does a really, really good job of explaining why we have institutional review boards and both good and bad things that have happened historically. So the one that I always like to bring up is this first one about the Nazi war crimes of World War II. I bring this up because what resulted from, so this, I don't know how far anyone is into the city training, but essentially you had a group of concentration camp prisoners and a group of physicians. And the physicians said, well, what would happen if we immersed these people in ice water or injected them with gasoline? And they had no rights. They couldn't say, that sounds great, or I don't want to do this. And so I just gave this talk. I'm going to get the math correct. So you can see that the code was written in 1947. So here we are 70 years later, and this code still applies today. And when people fill out the application, I think it's so important to remember this code. It has several components, and this is really what the IRB looks at. So the first part of the code says that consent has to be voluntary. I couldn't say to you all, okay, I'm actually a doctoral student, I'm doing a dissertation, I need you all to be part of my study, and you will be part of it. That's obviously not voluntary. The next two really relate as well, that the benefits have to outweigh the risk. So in the social sciences, it's going to be any type of emotional benefit has to outweigh any risk. In the medical area, we ask that animal experiments are done first. That's not always going to be possible in the social sciences. The next couple also really relate. We want to avoid any type of suffering, whether that's on a physical or emotional level. You also see these last couple that a participant can withdraw at any time. So some of you may do studies that occur over several sessions, and if you have a participant that says, I just don't have the time anymore, we have to respect that. An investigator must be qualified. So we're not critiquing your CV, but we're saying how is your particular background preparing you to do the study that is in question. And I never come up with a good example for this, but if we had a group of musicians proposing to do muscle biopsies, for example, we're going to say, how does that training prepare them? Again, that's not really the best example, but I always struggle to come up with a good one. I'm skipping through some of these slides because I think that the city training does a really good job of going through these. So we're going to skip about 30 years from 1947 into 1979, and at that point the government put out what's called the Belmont Report, and that has 3 ethical principles for the protection of human subjects, and you'll see some of them are the same as the Nuremberg Code, some of them are a little bit different. So the first is respect for persons, and what that means is we have to treat individuals as autonomous and make sure that they understand what they're being asked to do. So a lot of the critique that we give when we read studies is on the consent, because sometimes we'll read it, we'll take a break, we'll go back, we'll read it 3 more times. We have no clue what someone is being asked to do, and if we don't, the participant probably won't either. Beneficence, again, affects benefits and risk. So are the researchers maximizing benefit while minimizing risk? And justice means it affects the subject selection, and are participants ethically selected, and why is a particular subgroup being studied? So I know we talked this summer, Colleen, when we were discussing this, and I said, oh, by the time I give this there, or Eric gives this, there may be some changes to the regulations. So we've had what's called the Common Rule since 1991, and that's a federal policy for protecting human subjects. There's also a parallel set of regulations put out by the FDA. So as of now, the regulations are supposed to change in January, but there is now pushback from several groups. So at this time, we're holding tight. The changes really wouldn't affect really this group of students, because we're still working internally at ASU to see how to implement the changes. Essentially, they'll broaden some categories of exempt research and eliminate a need for continuing review in some cases. But we're hopeful that they'll give us a little bit more time to work through the changes to the regulations. Something important to bring up is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, at ASU there was a study in 1989 in which researchers had permission to use blood samples from the Havasupai tribe for diabetes research. Unfortunately, they took the samples and did various other types of analyses, and the tribe actually sued ASU in 2004. And so now for all work on tribal land with tribal populations, in addition or in parallel to the IRB review, there's also what's called a cultural review. If any of you are going to be working on tribal land or with tribal populations, feel free to write a note, or afterwards, Eric or I would be happy to talk to you about, the requirements and processes. So I want to now talk briefly about the review process at Arizona State University. So what we do in the IRB, again, is look at the risks and the benefits. And this is difficult. There's not a mathematical formula. But what we do is look at the proposed study and really try to help you get a study in which the benefits outweigh the risk. And by risks, they could be physical, they could be psychological, they could be informational. And the benefits also could be on an individual level, on a scientific level, or a social level. And some studies may be very benign and really have no real risk, and the benefit is not known at this time. So right now, and we always hesitate whether to give this type of this slide or not, the federal regulations have 3 types of review. These terms are awful. Exempt in the real world means you don't have to do something. In IRB, it means that it's very benign, low-risk research. So survey research with individuals over 18, interview research, and research using public data. The next level of review is what's called an expedited review. That's another term that it's kind of confusing because it doesn't mean faster necessarily. It means that it's pretty minimal risk research. And then the highest level of review is what's called the full board, and that's the group that meets only once a month, and that's the group that actually can disapprove something. So if you get feedback from us after submitting, it doesn't mean that the study isn't approvable. It means we need more information to be able to continue the review of the study. So I always tell people, if you've kind of, it's the end of the day, if you're getting tired, this slide right here is so important. At ASU, and in general, the review has to be done before recruitment or data collection can begin. There was a funny story a couple years ago where someone submitted a study on a Friday afternoon. We got to it on Tuesday and sent them some feedback, and they said, we already sent out the consent forms. And I said, well, why did you do that? Well, we just assumed when we submitted it went into a black hole. And I said, well, that's not really what happened, but we do need to review and approve everything before the project begins. That's the purpose of the IRB. So this is, again, the definitions of human subjects research in terms of what requires IRB review. This right here is a little bit of a summary of the process for submitting a study for review. So right now, and I should say that that some of you will not necessarily be needing an IRB review, because some of your projects, you may say, I'm turning it in for more of a course project. Others of you are going to require review. So on this slide, you're doing great because you're working on the city training. The next thing, and I'll try to bring this up, if not, we can give you our website. You'll want to work on the actual IRB application, but the protocol, which is either what's called the social behavioral or the bioscience form. In my opinion, it's the hardest part is developing the study. If you have a clear idea of what you're doing, and again, this is just my opinion, I don't think writing it should be that challenging. The ones that I find the most challenging to read are ones that probably shouldn't have been submitted yet because the research team was still figuring out what it is that they were doing. So after you've written your application, your consent, developed your data collection tools, you'll upload them into our ERA portal. And then the PI, who is a faculty member, will review and submit these to us. And sometimes, the PI will submit on a Monday. Sometimes we can provide feedback that day. Other times, it's going to be a couple days. So give us, some time. If you think you've submitted and it's been more than a week, reach out to us. Sometimes the PI actually hasn't hit the submit button. Other times we're just really busy and it's going to take us a little bit longer. So once you submit to us, 95% of the time we're going to have questions. And so what we'll do is then send you some feedback. You'll be able to make revisions to the study. And then once it's in an approvable state, it goes to a reviewer. Sometimes the reviewer approves as is. Other times they have additional questions. So we hope the process takes about 1 to 6 weeks. It can really vary. So again, on this slide, it's a summary of what you can be doing at this time or prior to submitting. So I hope in terms of the city training that everyone is taking the right one. You'll see on the training, make sure that it says IRB in front of it. Sometimes people take the responsible conduct of research training, which is different than the IRB. So I know you're working on those this week, but just make sure that you're taking the right one. The nice thing about the city training, if you've done some of it, it actually saves a record of what you've done, and we're able to go in and actually verify that you've taken the training. So I talked a little bit before about the application process. Your principal investigator is going to be a faculty or staff member, and that person is responsible. I'll just say something. Okay. That person is responsible for reviewing and submitting the materials, both initial and modifications. Anyone else that's involved with data collection or analysis is a study team member. So that doesn't affect authorship or anything, but we need the faculty member to be the one that's submitting the study. So this slide is another one that's really important to keep in mind, that if your study is human subjects research, it has to be submitted for review. You would fill out either the social behavioral or the bioscience application. If you're not sure, you can email us at research.integrity@asu.edu. I'll put in that email address. Sorry. And we can tell you what form to fill out. And as you go through this online portal, and this is not the best analogy, the best I can come up with this ERA portal is equating it to like a Walgreens site. If you upload photos there, it's kind of the same thing where you have everything saved, you upload it to a portal. And it'll walk you through, you'll submit your protocol, your consent or parental permission forms, your data collection tools, any recruitment materials, any offsite documents that you have. So just prepare them however you would on your computer, and then you'll be able to actually upload them into our portal. This is a screenshot. I don't think anyone's probably at that stage quite yet, but this is the actual IRB protocol, the social behavioral one, and there's 13 questions on it. And so just write in clear language so that someone who isn't familiar with your study will understand what it is you're trying to do. And again, really avoid jargon and just keep it simple, so that someone who's reading tons of these every day could really follow what it is you're trying to do. This right here is our online ERA portal, and this bubble on here, it's kind of hard to see, shows the various stages of submission. So if a study has successfully been submitted to us, pre-review will show up. And this right here, this is what you'll see when you go to create the study. So in terms of the title and the short title, just come up with a title that matches what it is you're trying to do. And when you get to point 7, that's where you're actually going to add the protocol document that you've filled out. We've actually gotten a couple that are blank sometimes. We need them to be filled out for the particular study. And right here on this slide, this is an example of some of the questions that Eric asked to someone. So, you know, he had about 5 questions here. Then that person was able to go in and make changes. So you can see we do, you know, ask questions throughout the process. In terms of, you know, if you get stuck, our website, researchintegrity.asu.humans, has some really good information. There's also some tutorials on how to create a new study and how to create a modification. So in terms of modifications, those are required for studies that are reviewed by expedited and full board review. And you'll know that because you'll have an expiration date on them. For those studies, you'll also have to do what's called a continuing review because those studies are approved for up to a year at a time. If your study got an exempt determination, there's no expiration date and we don't need to see modifications. But if you have questions when you get to that point, let us know. This is just a quick list of some PDFs and resources that we put together about how to link data, and we see a lot of projects from a group called the DMP group, and they have some work with research and clinics. And so what we'll do is we'll send these. You can open them by PDF, but we'll try to send these separately if that works as well. These are some other resources for those of you who are really interested in the IRB and learning more about it, just generally, not ASU specific necessarily. So here are some workshops that we put on. We have, I mentioned earlier, the work with tribal populations. Coming up this Thursday, we have that seminar. There are also some responsible conduct of research workshops, some of which occurred, some of which will occur in the future. And if you're interested in attending any of these, let us know, and we'll give you the information on that. At this point, let me just make sure. Oh, there's a lot of special topics. I want to go ahead and give our contact information, and also, because I'm not sure how long the class lasts, I want to also open it up to questions.
Okay, questions for Susan? So Susan, the questions are one of our students' responsible conduct module says RCR and not IRB.
No,
he doesn't see another option. Is he looking at the wrong thing?
RCR is different. RCR is the responsible conduct of research. So I don't know Dee Dee's last name, but when you go back into City, you'll want to take the IRB one. There's a responsible conduct of research training that is social and behavioral research, but that's separate from the IRB one. And in terms of the City training, it lasts for 4 years. Emmett used IRB 15 years ago. I'm not sure if that was at ASU or elsewhere. The regulations, as I mentioned, they are changing. Institutions have the ability to be more stringent than the federal regulations. So over the past 15 years, there's been more research using the internet, using Facebook, doing international research. It was at the University U of C, so their processes may be different than ours at ASU. Let's see, so for the IRB, I'm going to try to pull up the actual name on the module, if you can bear with me, because I can go through my yeah, so I'm going to just type what the city training should be.
Shelley, to answer your question, has IRB ever denied anyone? Yes, there are definitely projects that get denied, and I'm sure Susan can speak to that a little bit more.
There are some, so I mean, there's some, we try our best. There's some that, so, you know, in our position, in my position, in Eric's position, there's some that we know, and there are just a few of them that we sense aren't going to be approved. We'll try to tell people ahead of time and try to encourage them of alternate ways to submit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and the board, the IRB, the full convened committee that meets once a month is the one that can make the final determination. We don't like it to go to that level, but there are times that studies have been disapproved. The one that I have permission to talk about is several years ago there was a faculty member and a student who wanted to do work in prisons, and they wanted to compare a school in Scottsdale to a school in Connecticut, and the demographics were very different. This is putting kids at risk. And so the IRB said, okay, fine, if the prison gives approval, we're going to give approval. If not, it's a moot point. The prison didn't give approval, they disapproved it. There are some other cases that are more recent that it's happened. I don't know that I have permission to share those, but if we think it's going to go down that path, we try to let you know. I know there was a case recently we really tried, and they still wanted to submit anyway. We tried our best to you know, come up with alternate ways of having them do the study. I would say in terms of a percentage, probably less than 0.0001% gets disapproved.
And I think the important thing to keep in mind for our students as well in that is, you know, Susan alluded to the fact before that some students just submit their culminating projects for course credit. I would say that's the vast majority of students in the program, assuming they are not working with vulnerable or protected populations. So if they're just working with adult, you know, patients in the primary care clinic, and you're just doing this as part of your CP, and do not have any intention of publishing or presenting your findings, which goes to that generalizable knowledge aspect that Susan was talking about before. There are oftentimes students opt to forego IRB, and that is considered acceptable as long as you are agreeing from the get-go that you will subsequently not attempt to publish or present your findings. We have had students who have not gone through IRB, have had spectacular results, and then have been really disappointed that they can't do anything with them. So you want to keep that kind of in mind. So yeah, you don't have to do the Native American one. We oftentimes encourage students to do that, especially since so many students at ASU are interested in that population, given our general area. But there's no quiz associated with it. It comes up every time on when people do it on the CITI that it's hard to demonstrate that you finished it in that regard. So again, if you look at it, Dee Dee, you mentioned what the course says, but IRB, it's the Social and Biomedical Research Group 1 is the one that you're supposed to be doing. So Group 1 Basic in that regard. So that's the IRB one that you're supposed to be.
See, Brianna's typing. No. So groups, there's different city courses. I'm going to look at my other computer for a second. So there's IRB, Biomedical Group 1 or IRB Social and Behavioral Group 2. They're similar courses. One is more biomedically based, one is more social behaviorally based. Then for our board members, they can either take Group 3 or Group 4. So I would say just pick whatever is more applicable to you. So if you think your work is more in social behavioral, take that one. If you think it's more in bioscience, take that area, that course.
We typically recommend the biomedical one since you're going to be doing any work that you're doing in a medical environment. It's typically why we encourage that one. So Dee Dee, don't worry about it.
Yeah, Dee Dee, what's your last name? Because what I can do right now, I can see how.
Yeah, group 1 in conflict of interest, Brianna.
No. It's going to say, I will try to, it really, when you register, look for the module with IRB in front of it. I'm going to lose the screen because we have really good directions on our website for it. I'm going to see if I can find Dee Dee's and add.
Right, and I think we point the students to the IRB website. I'm just pulling it up on my end so I can double check.
Okay. That. I'm sorry for the typos. I'm trying to use two screens at once. Let's see, Dee Dee.
Oh no, we don't. We direct them directly to the CITI training.
Okay. Just a second. I think I can. Yeah. So Dee Dee, you actually took. Yeah, you. So Dee Dee took both courses.
Right, and so that is what we are asking you all to do. The main thing that you need to make sure is that the IRB Group 1 biomedical is the correct one. that's where Susan was referencing the IRB thing, element, I believe. So. You're good. And the other thing to keep in mind with this too is, so for this assignment, you're submitting certificates, your completion report to the course shell and to your My DBH. And so if there's something wonky submitted to your My DBH, your advisor will of course let you know that as well. So it's all right, Dee Dee. Other questions for Susan? Correct, Roblin. That is what we ask you to sign up for.
So for your class, I'm not going to contradict anything that you're required to do for the class is absolutely fine. For when you actually apply to the IRB, I just, was trying to say what the courses are that you'd be taking.
I think that's probably where some of the confusion is, but yeah, that's the key element for you guys.
In terms of Allie's question about asking for information about family members, that's fine. When you're asking information that's personal, we say, this comes up especially with open-ended questions, we tell them not to use the name of others, like say my partner, my mother, my father, so that you're not identifying people directly.
More typing coming. So again, for your guys' reference, when you will get to CP2, that's when we'll really determine, well, yes, Brianna, all 4 classes for the class. So as listed on the course shell. So you're taking all 4 that are listed on the course shell. for the class. We're aware, though, that the Native American research element does not have a quiz associated with it. So don't be worried that you can't demonstrate that you passed that. We, like I said, we want you to do it because of, as Susan mentioned, that particular issue with the Havasupai a number of years ago, and because many of our students are work on tribal land in some capacity, so it's good. But what I was saying before is when it comes to whether or not you will individually go through IRB, that is a decision and a conversation you'll have with your advisor in CP2 based on your research questions and kind of what you are looking to pursue, with the main things being, are you working with protected populations, as we discussed before, and then do you want to publish or present your findings? We typically encourage students to set themselves up so that they have that opportunity, but it's an individual decision in that regard with consultation from your advisor as to whether or not you decide to pursue that. Yes, you should upload certificates for everything that you did, Teresa. I don't know that the Native American one provides a certificate since there's not a quiz associated with it. I know frequently I'll see a screenshot that said not passed because there's not a quiz associated with it, and that's fine too. We're cognizant of that. Other questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Doesn't seem like it. As a result, we will wrap up for this evening. If there are questions, let us know. Like Susan said, I will say, in my experience, Susan is incredibly responsive to questions, as is everybody within the IRB office team. And as I mentioned before, Susan was talking about the black hole that somebody commented on. That is pretty far from my experience with them. If anything, in my experience, myself and the student I'm working with are getting reminders from them that we need to do stuff on our end through the system rather than us needing to remind them to review. So Susan, I don't know if you can speak to Shelley's question. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So in terms of the non-scientists, so our committees right now each have 9 members. Most of them are faculty or staff at ASU, and then the community member. And so Deborah Murphy, she's our institutional official for the IRB. She works with the provost's office, with the vice president for research, and gets recommendations for faculty who are interested in serving. We try to have a lot of the committee be composed of people who have actually done human subjects research, and there are obviously some members that haven't. But the non-scientist, it can be someone with a background in law and a background in religion. They give very sort of vague definitions of the government. The one thing that's very important about the non-scientist is that you can't hold a meeting without them.
All right. Well, if nobody has any further questions, we will wrap up for the evening. As a reminder, all of your trainings are due this Sunday. Don't wait until the last minute. They are time consuming to complete. So if you haven't started already, get started. It's kind of easiest to do them in little chunks of time, and rather than trying to do it in one sitting. Thank you again, Susan, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm sorry we can never get the screen to work, but this is better than I think one of the other times when I don't even think we got Adobe, so this is great.
Without webcam, so it's not an issue. So have a good night, everyone, and I will
have a great night. Thank you.
Take care.